Hello there. Allow me to read to you from Matthew chapter 26 and from verse 47, a passage where we read about how Jesus dealt with the power and the authority that he had. While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus replied, "Friend, do what you came for." Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. "Put your sword back in its place," Jesus said to him, "for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way?" At that time, Jesus said to the crowd, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this has all taken place, that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. When I was 19 years old, I went to a football match in London on my own. It was Queen's Park Rangers versus Manchester United, and it was the final game of the season. I sat amongst the QPR fans, and there were 20,000 people watching what was a really good game. But at the end of the match, something happened which really frightened me, terrified me. As the referee blew the final whistle, all the players ran off the pitch, down the tunnel and into the changing room, and as they did so, hundreds and hundreds of Manchester United fans poured off the stands and onto the pitch. Now, to be fair, most of them were there just to have a bit of a good time, to celebrate the fact that they'd won and to celebrate the fact that this was the final game of the season. But quite a lot of them were looking for trouble, and hundreds of them were walking and running towards the stand where I was sitting, and they were wanting to have a fight. And I watched as the front row of people found themselves getting kicked and punched and seriously hurt. And I knew that unless I did something, I was going to be next. As these fans came towards me, I knew I had a decision to make. Either I was going to stand my ground and get ready to fight back and to protect myself, or I was going to have to run away. What the psychologists call the fight or flight response. Well, fortunately, there was a set of steps fairly close to where I was standing, so I jumped up onto the concrete barrier and then down onto the steps about 8 to 10 feet. Then I went down onto the concourse where there was more fighting going on. I ran out of the concourse, out of the ground, down the high street, until eventually I got a mile down the road at Shepherd's Bush tube station. Even when I got there, I ran down the steps onto the platform and onto a train, and it was only as the train pulled away that I realised I was safe and I could relax. I chose to run away from the situation. I think it was probably the right thing to do, and I was kept safe. But the disciples did something similar when Jesus was arrested. The Bible tells us at the end of this passage that the disciples ran away and abandoned Jesus. And who can blame them? They knew that Jesus was about to be arrested. They knew that he was likely to be thrown into prison and possibly tortured. They knew that he would be convicted on trumped-up charges and that perhaps he would be killed. One or two of them were up for a fight. In fact, when they did so, Jesus had to tell them off and say, "Look, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. But I tell you, don't you realise that at a moment's notice I could call upon 12 armies of angels, 12 legions of angels to come and rescue me from this situation?" But then, how would the scriptures be fulfilled, said Jesus? How would all this happen? I find it quite extraordinary that Jesus, at the moment of greatest terror, when he was about to be arrested, about to be taken away, about to be tortured, when he knew that the very next day, for 6 hours, he would bleed and suffocate to death until eventually he did die on his own in the most humiliating and excruciating pain, that when he was given the option of opting out, he chose not to. When he was given the option of fighting his way out of the situation, when he was given the option of escaping the situation, he just stood there and allowed it all to happen. And what's more, moments earlier we read that when Jesus was in the garden praying, "Not my will but yours be done," an angel came to strengthen him. He was in so much distress that he needed an angel's strength. So he accepted the help of an angel to strengthen him through the situation. But when at that moment he could have called upon the angels to help him to escape, he chose not to. Because how else could we be reconciled to God? How else could we be forgiven? Jesus knew that he had to die on that cross in our place so that we might be forgiven, so that we might have a right relationship with God. It couldn't happen any other way. And if Jesus chose another alternative, then we would not know the peace and love and the joy of knowing God. I don't know what kind of love it must have taken for Jesus to have resisted the temptation, to just stand there, but I'm so glad that he did. You only have to watch the TV news or listen to the radio or pick up a newspaper to discover that there are many, many people in this world who are desperate to have power, whether it's at a local level or a national level. And when they get the power, they're desperate to cling onto it for as long as possible, claiming that they have the authority to exercise the power in the way that they wish. But that wasn't Jesus' way. Jesus, we read in this passage, had the authority to call upon 12 armies of angels to rescue him from the situation, but he chose to lay aside that authority. He chose not to exercise the power that he had to escape the situation he was in, but instead went willingly to the cross out of love for each one of us. So this Easter, may we look to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross and is now sat down at the right hand of God.